Hello everybody, welcome back to the Film Buds Podcast. This is our 52nd bonus show, and my name is Henry. This time around, I'm going to be talking the Mad Max franchise. So starting with the original Mad Max 2, or also known as The Road Warrior, Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, and Mad Max Fury Road. Plus, I'm going to be doing a bonus review of Peter Jackson's Mortal Engines from 2018, which kind of is a mix between Mad Max and Howl's Moving Castle, the Miyazaki film, I feel like. And it's one that it didn't do very well at the box office, but I thought it was pretty different and refreshing, and it did have a bit of a Mad Max vibe or influence. Plus, the composer Junkie XL also did the score for Mortal Engines, which he did for Fury Road. So I figured I include it as well, just to get one more movie in there. So thanks again for joining us. Thank you for downloading, donating, and subscribing. However it is that you got this show, we really do appreciate it, and we hope you will subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure to check out the regular podcast wherever you listen to podcasts normally. Rate, review that show. Above all, just thanks for tuning in. So my life with the Mad Max franchise started with Fury Road, which is probably the case with a lot of newer audiences. Then I went back and watched the first three. First of all, Mad Max Fury Road is my all-time favorite movie. Above all, I saw it 4 times in theaters. I've seen it many, many times since then, and every time I think it is one of the most incredible, unique, best action movies of all time. And we'll get to that when we get to Fury Road. But that was one big interest in doing this show, and plus Furiosa, the new prequel film coming out next year, I cannot wait for. So I figured this would be a good time as any to talk about Mad Max as a whole. But otherwise, I did, like I said, I went back and watched the first 3 after. So I think unlike for maybe some people who started with Mad Max, the original films with Mel Gibson, and then saw Fury Road later, maybe their opinions are different of the franchise than mine. And I would love to hear your thoughts in one way or the other. Let's go ahead and get into it. So Mad Max, the original, came out in 1979, is directed by George Miller, stars Mel Gibson, Joanne Samuel, Hugh Keys-Byrne, Steve Bisley, Tim Burns. That's about it. Not a huge cast. And I'm just going to do the synopsis for the first one. In a self-destructing world, a vengeful Australian policeman sets out to stop a violent motorcycle gang. This one made, which blew my mind, $100 million against a budget of around $400,000. So at the time, it was the most profitable film ever. Before I looked into these movies, I thought this movie would have made a little bit of money at the box office and then just gathered more fandom over the years. But no, it did pretty darn well. I've seen the movie, I think, 3 times over the last couple of years. We'll get to Fury Road, but I think having seen Fury Road first makes the original 3 seem very much lesser. Not to say that they're bad movies, but I think, if you'd seen the first 3 perhaps and then saw Fury Road, you would have been like, man, the series just keeps getting better and better and better. And then seeing Fury Road first, being blown away, that becoming my favorite movie of all time, and then going back and watching the others, it's like, it's just not the same. And I think for what it is, coming out in the 70s, it goes without being said, the stunts are crazy. The car chases, like all the practical effects, the stunts, the car crashes, people flying, off of vehicles being destroyed. All that stuff is pretty insane to watch, even if it's not like a 5 out of 5 movie to me. You don't really get stunts like that around this time done in this way that George Miller did. Mel Gibson, I think, is a very good Mad Max for these movies. I prefer Tom Hardy. Mel Gibson's personal life has definitely tarnished his reputation, and my fondness of him has severely diminished, or interest in seeing his later works has diminished over the years. But I think in these movies, he is pretty good as Mad Max and definitely set the standard for who the character was and all of those things. So I do appreciate that or respect that. I do think in these movies, Beyond Thunderdome, spoiler, is, I would say, the weakest of the 4. I don't think that's a hot take at all. I do find directionally, George Miller does get just, even if the third film is the weakest, I think from a direction standpoint, he does get better as the movies go on. Like, I think this movie, the direction and the editing is not that good. It's pretty choppy. I don't really get a real sense of geography or of character, like getting to know characters, or lots of times relationships between characters. I feel like the editing and the direction is a little confusing and haphazard at times there are moments or sequences where that kind of works in the movie's favor because the movie is so radical, so bizarre in terms of the energy and the characters and all that. But just as a whole, I do find that to bring the movie down, but I do think that he gets better as he goes along. Like I said, the movie, it's pretty plotless. Like it starts out with that pretty epic chase at the beginning, which is amazing. The choreography and cars flipping, and it's amazing to watch, and thinking that it was made on only 400,000 and coming at the time that it did, where there were not a lot of safety measures put into place. It's pretty crazy that chases still hold up a lot better than a lot of new movies, honestly, in my opinion. So that's a great moment. I find the middle of the movie to be the weakest part, which is the heart of the movie, which is too bad. I think that the movie doesn't really get much of a plot until the last 20 or 30 minutes, where Mad Max's wife and baby die, and there's that whole revenge car chase sequence. The middle of the movie I find to be pretty forgettable. Like I just don't really care much about the characters. I love the look. There's nothing cooler than costume and production design in Mad Max movies, like the weird BDSM stuff, like the cyberpunk, almost like Fallout video game series kind of style to the outfits. And that's, these movies have definitely inspired a lot of movies since, in terms of the crazy designs of costumes, hairstyles, vehicles. Like there's nothing cooler than a Mad Max makeshift vehicle, especially in Fury Road. But even in these early movies, the vehicles and the designs of the motorcycles and the go-karts and trucks and all this stuff are just amazing. I can't get enough of that stuff. Like I can't really think of another franchise like this that has more interesting, crazy designs for vehicles and equipment than Mad Max. And even in this movie, that's there. Like I mentioned, I think the third act is the best part emotionally. There's the big shock of the wife and baby dying, and then him really becoming the Mad Max that we know, where he's this lone wanderer just going to help people when they need it, or getting wrapped into things and typically helping the people who are the righteous people in a situation, and just being that wanderer kind of cowboy character, which I love that kind of thing. And I love Westerns. I love twists on Westerns, which this one kind of is in some ways. But overall, it would be my second to the bottom, which, there's only 4 movies, but it would be my second least favorite of the 4, because I do appreciate that it set the baseline. It walked so the others could run. But going back and watching it after having seen all the others and really sat with it for a long time, the first one is a little messy. It's a little subpar at times in terms of the production. But then there are those great highs that do keep it elevated, and in some ways do make it classic, even if it's not a masterpiece. Definitely worth watching if you've only seen Fury Road, or if you haven't seen any of them. I don't know what the best way to start is, because I feel like if a lot of newer audiences maybe go back to these movies first, even, they won't be that blown away by them. So maybe it is just better to watch Fury Road and then go back and watch the others. I don't know, but maybe there's not one right way to do it. I still would give this a look no matter what, even if you don't end up loving it. Like if you love Fury Road, or if you like cool car chase action movies, I would give this a look, because it is quite unique. Well, that one is a 3.5 out of 5. All right, let's get to The Road Warrior, which was also just called Mad Max 2, but in the US at least it was just titled The Road Warrior. This one came out in 1981, once again directed by George Miller, and stars Bruce Spence, Michael Preston, Max Phipps, Vernon Wells, Kel Nilsson. That's about it. And this one made $36 million against a budget of around 4.5. So definitely a step down from the first film's financial success, but still definitely a hit. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, by far the most critically acclaimed of the 3. This is considered by many, at least from what I understand, to be the favorite of the original trilogy, which I would agree with. I've seen the movie same thing with Mad Max. I've seen it about 3 times. And I think every single time I watch it, it's about the same. The movie, for one thing, it's a huge improvement directionally and editing wise. I think the movie flows better. The characters are more interesting in terms of how they're presented. The writing is better. Just the overall flow of the story is a huge step up from the first. Even if it's still not perfect, it's still much, much better. And even, I think, surpasses 3 as well. This movie set the standard, or is what George Miller drew from the most for Fury Road. It feels like they took the last 30 minutes of The Road Warrior and made it into a full movie for Fury Road. That's kind of what it feels like in terms of the kind of chases, the effects, the storyline. I feel like that's almost what Fury Road is in some ways. But I think the movie is pretty awesome. It's not a masterpiece, I still think. It's better than the first one and it's better than 3, but it's not a 5 out of 5 to me. But there aren't really any other movies like it at this quality and then done in this style that I can really think of. Like, there's nothing really out there like Mad Max fully. Yeah, there's been a lot of things inspired by Mad Max, but going back and watching these original 3 and especially Fury Road, it's hard to compare to something truly at that level. Starting off, I think the narration at the beginning is awesome. It's a little maybe over the top, but it works for the story. I love Mad Max and his dog being his sidekick throughout this whole thing, and then him running into this wanderer, rebel, criminal guy, and then them end up having this weird makeshift partnership and friendship somewhat throughout the movie. And I think the whole sequence, all the time spent at the base camp is pretty great. The humongous character is amazing. The villain, that weird BDSM stuff is awesome in terms of the costume and production design. The guy with the red mohawk is awesome. The feral boy with the boomerang, that's great. And that entire sequence where they do attack the camp is really, really intense. And it goes right back to that use of practical effects. A bunch of cars and motorcycles and other vehicles winding in and out of each other, crashing into each other. Like, I'm amazed that people weren't killed on these movies and it didn't just become a complete disaster, because it's still, watching it now, it's still pretty amazing to think, wow, they actually did that for real. Because most movies now would not do that for real. It's too dangerous, too much work, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a big reason why all these movies hold up. The final 20, 30 minute chase is so well done. There are points where the pacing still and the editing of certain sequences do just suddenly kind of drag. Like, I feel like he perfected that with Fury Road, which I don't think has really any pacing issues. But I think even in this, which is the best of the 3, there are points even in the action where I start to phase out, like during certain monologues of characters or of action sequences. There would just be, I kind of just completely lose coherence of the scene, but not a big deal in this one, because I think that those different moments in that chase it's just genius. And the stunts, some of the best stunts and choreography are actually in the third film's final chase, but this one is definitely the defining action sequence, I think, of the 3. There's always at least one vehicle who gets plowed into and is completely obliterated, which I love. And just seeing that for real and thinking, how did they film that? How did they actually get that done is pretty wild. All these stories are very simple. This one 3 has a little bit of plot. This one still doesn't have that much plot. It's mostly just a quest for trying to get gasoline, and then Mad Max being duped on that, and there not really being any salvation for anyone, and then him just having to get these people to safety and then going off on his own way, which is what he does in all the others as well. It's a solid movie. I feel like every time I do rewatch it, even if it's about the same level, there's always new stuff that I didn't see before or didn't think about before. And it's nothing crazy deep. There's nothing real, huge, deep underlying messages. It's just a pretty wild ride and journey into this strange apocalyptic wasteland filled with characters that, unlike anything else I've ever seen, George Miller just has. There's a reason he's done all 4 movies doing Furiosa. This is his baby. He has a mastery of understanding this world, of what it is, what it should be. And I'm glad that he's continuing to do this and he's not just handing it off to other filmmakers. Not to say that some filmmakers couldn't do a great job with this series, but I'm glad he's doing, at least so far, done every single installment. I think the acting improves on this one. None of the acting in the movie is amazing. Even Mel Gibson isn't incredible, but he's definitely the best. You're with him through the whole movie, and you've seen Fury Road maybe even start with The Road Warrior, because you don't really need to see the first film to truly understand it. There's enough of a prologue and an epilogue for the movie to really stand on its own, So that's another point in the movie's favor. Even though it's within this franchise, you could watch The Road Warrior and understand the character of Mad Max pretty quickly. So that one is a heavy 4 out of 5. All right, let's get to Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome, which came out in 1985, is co-directed by Miller, but also by George Ogilvy, and stars Tina Turner, Bruce Spence again, Frank Thring. Once again, not a huge cast. This one made $36 million against the budget of 10, so still about the same level as Mad Max 2. Not a huge hit, but definitely still profitable. This one I've only seen once. I just saw it in the last week or so. I think, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's pretty unanimous that this is the worst of the 4 films to date. And I would agree. I don't think the movie is bad. I think that it's a little frustrating and a little disappointing. And I think some people are a little too harsh on it because it's like you're coming off Road Warrior, which is awesome. And then there's this big step down, and it's very, very different in terms of storyline from the Road Warrior and even the first Mad Max. And so I think some people are like, this movie sucks, like nowhere near as good as the first 2. So I went in thinking, oh man, this is going to suck. Maybe low expectations helped. I don't know. I think the movie's still all right. I think the first act of the movie is a pretty great setup where you meet him and he's almost like this nomad, like almost religious character, long hair, these flowing robes. And then he stumbles upon this Thunderdome and he's forced into this world, which feels like in terms of production design, feels the closest to Fury Road. That's what is most disappointing about the movie is they spend too little time in that world because, you're thrust into this weird, dark, disturbing, scary, like underworld of, like cage matches. Again, it feels like the concept for Mad Max Fury Road when he first entered that world in terms of that sanctuary homestead that you first enter. What I hated is he's asked, hey, how do I get into the Thunderdome? How do I get out? And it's like, all right, you have to find someone to fight, beat him, et cetera, et cetera. He does that. And then when he does that, he's out. And then he goes into this almost like Lost Boys-esque, almost Peter Pan kind of world. And that's where you spend most of the movie. And I feel like scripting wise, story wise, that was just such a huge mistake because I feel like it's called Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. And I feel like they should have spent the majority of time in the Thunderdome underworld, whatever you want to call it, because I think that was by far the most visually interesting, the most suspense, most drama, the best action. And I do think that the third act, it ends great. Like they nail that ending with that action sequence. But the middle of the movie, similar to the first Mad Max, just really kind of drags. It's forgettable. Some people say the kids are really annoying. The Lost Boys kind of group. I don't really find that. I just found that they were very underwhelming, just not very interesting, pretty bland. When that storyline was going on, I was kind of checking out most of the time. Didn't really get engaged very often. And I was really excited that they ended the movie as they did because there's the awesome sequence it's almost like a truck train sequence, which also they drew from with Fury Road. That final sequence, it has one of the most insane pieces of choreography, action stunt that I've ever seen, especially considering this came out in the 80s, where there's this guy hanging off of this fast moving vehicle on a pole and he's swinging left and right to miss these barriers. I'm guessing it looks like they did that for real. Maybe I'm wrong. It looked very completely realistic and practical. They actually filmed that and some guy did not actually get killed. He is doing it real time, seemingly. And if I'm wrong and somebody knows something else, let me know. But if that's correct, it's pretty crazy. I've never seen anything really like that where clearly that person was in extreme danger. And they probably had to have the most trust in that guy to actually do that because that could have ended really, really badly. That's amazing. I think that entire sequence is pretty great. It does end with Mad Max helping these people get to safety and then going off on his own way. Signature part of the Max character. And he does that again in Fury Road. The movie is frustrating. I think that's just the best way to put it. I don't think it's a bad movie. It is by far the worst of the 3. It could have been so much more. That's what is most annoying is like you see that first act so interesting, so strange, so bizarre, and so immersed into this new world suddenly. And then you're out of it like that, after 20, 30 minutes. It does save itself a little bit with that third act. It is the longest of the 3. And I think it feels that way, especially in that second act where you just don't care that much. At least I didn't. Being the third film, which, we didn't get another one for 30 years, literally 30 years. It is too bad that that's how the trilogy ended because You always want to go off with a bang. Good to know that they did come back with a bang with Fury Road. Just not an amazing movie, not as bad as people say, I think. Not one I really feel the need to go back and rewatch all that often unless I'm doing something like a review or I want to marathon all 4 movies. Not a classic to me. And so that's a 3 out of 5. All right, let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to Mad Max Fury Road, which came out in 2015, is once again directed by George Miller, stars Tom Hardy, Charlize Theron, Nicholas Hoult, Zoe Kravitz, Rosie Huntington-Whiteley, Nathan Jones, Riley Coe, Abby Lee, who I love, and a few others. The synopsis: in a post-apocalyptic wasteland, a woman rebels against a tyrannical ruler in search of her homeland with the aid of a group of female prisoners, a psychotic worshiper, and a drifter named Max. This one made $380 million against a budget of around $170, so it was considered to be not a financial hit, but I think by many on a lot of lists, it's one of the defining movies of the 2010s, one of the best action movies, definitely. To me, obviously, being my favorite movie, the best action movie of that decade, and the best film of the decade. A lot of Oscar nominations, huge widespread acclaim, just really out of the blue. Like, I knew when this trailer came out, it was the most insane thing I'd ever seen. Even before seeing the movie, I had not heard of Mad Max, I think, at the time. And so this was completely new to me. I was like, what the hell is this? And as I said at the beginning, I saw it 4 times in theaters. I have seen it countless times since. I want to show it to every single person I can. And because I think it is the most amazing, inventive, the use of practical effects in this, about 85% or so, if I'm not mistaken, of the effects, the stunts were all done for real. And that is just unbelievable. Like the amount of vehicles, the amount of extras, production design, the vehicles are incredible in terms of the designs. Like there's nothing else like it. The costumes, the crazy, one thing I do really like about, even in the original Mad Max films, is the little tweaks on, some of it is Australian slang, and then some just tweaks on normal dialects and dialogue, where it's clearly in a post-apocalyptic world where things have education, information has deteriorated and people just don't talk. People talk differently. I really like how they incorporate that in this as well. Probably better than the first 3. First off, Tom Hardy and Charlize Theron, incredible. Like, I think Charlize Theron, this is definitely her best performance and one of, if not Tom Hardy's best. Character of Furiosa is probably in my favorite 3 characters of all time, like right alongside Elizabeth Salander from The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Furiosa is just forever fascinated by her, love her, fired by her. I just love that character, and that performance by Theron is incredible. And I wish she had gotten more awards buzz and all that, because I think she's amazing in it, even though she doesn't really say a lot, and nor does Tom Hardy. But that character is just, to me, the best part of the entire franchise. And even though I love Tom Hardy's Mad Max, I think there's nothing like Furiosa, and Charlize Theron is Furiosa in this. And that's why I'm really looking forward to the movie Furiosa, even though it is being played by Anya Taylor-Joy. I think that's just because I love her too. Charlize Theron will always be my favorite part of this series. So starting off, visually, movie is amazing. This one obviously had a huge budget as opposed to the first 3, which didn't. There's a lot of special effects in this, but not to the point where it's taking the movie over. It's just backdrops. Certain explosions are exaggerated. Immortan Joe character, I don't want to sound like a broken record. There's just nothing like characters and villains than what's in Mad Max. There's just nothing like it. And Immortan Joe is unlike any other villain I've ever come across. The look, the performance, the writing, just overall presentation. The movie has a very over-the-top feel, which I love. It's self-aware. It's not goofy in the sense of it's bad, but there's good humor. It gets so insane sometimes that it does produce laughter in a good way, though. Just thinking this is the most, because I remember in theaters, this was the most insane thing I'd ever seen. There's still nothing like it, even close to being compared to it, especially in terms of action movies, and really in some ways ruined a lot of action movies for me since, because I'm just thinking this is not Mad Max. You see how, George Miller being in, I think his 70s, just blows all these other franchises and cinematic universes out of the water. This movie 30 years later, after having done the Happy Feet movies in between those films. And as I said, there's still nothing like it that has come out in the last decade or so. The action, I mean, the whole movie, it's called Fury Road. And what I love is it is basically just an endless chase. There's very few moments where the characters are just standing still. And that's what I love. There aren't really many other movies that take on that style and even dare to do that. But they find ways of having the action feed into the characters' personalities. You get to know people through their actions, what they're able to do, what they're not able to do in terms of the wives, the slave wives who Charlize Theron is trying to save, then Furiosa herself and Mad Max. You get to know everyone through action as well as just a little bit of dialogue. And then you don't need to know a whole lot because again, it's Mad Max and it's not trying to be something crazy deep, but there's that underlying fascination there, at least for me. Any scenes at night, I love where it's kind of a purpley blue haze going from the orange, yellowish, golden day desert sequences to immediately that fade to black and then to the purplish blue night is gorgeous. I love that and so beautifully done and inventive. I think that sequence where I love the idea of the blood bag where Tom Hardy's strapped to the front of the vehicle and Nicholas Holt's character is driving him, through this hell. That's amazing. I mean, really, there's just so many minute, momentary parts of this movie that I could talk about for hours and hours and hours. But I think that initial chase from the Citadel is what it's called. Now I remember through the sandstorm is one of the best pieces of cinema I could think I've ever seen. Just the intensity, once again, the effects, the practical effects, the stunts, the choreography, the amount of vehicles they used, the maniacal guitarist kind of drummer boy character is seeing that for the first time. You're just like, what is this movie? And it's amazing, for that reason. It's few other filmmakers and studios would dare to do something like this. And then they not only did it, but George Miller did it in a masterful way. It's a masterpiece of a movie. It may not be a movie for everyone. I think, it's so at 11 and it's so wild that there are some people who just think, what is this movie? It's all over the place. It's too macho or it's too this or it's too that. And which I get, if it's not a movie for you, it's not a movie for you, but there's no denying the quality of this production just in every way. And it was known that it was hell to shoot and Charlize Theron and Tom Hardy got really butted heads a lot over the months. And it was, I can imagine just watching it, definitely was hell to shoot, especially considering how much practical work was done. One of the really big emotional beats of the movie is where Charlize Theron seemingly gets back to her homeland where she was taken from as a child. And then she realizes that it's all gone and all the stuff that she's done up until that point has basically been for nothing in at least some ways. And she just goes out into the middle of the desert, collapses and just screams. I think that is such an iconic, powerful moment that you wouldn't really expect would work in a movie like this, but it does perfectly. And I love that moment. It's really heartbreaking because at least I can relate to it where having your hopes for something, maybe coming back home to something, having your hopes to go to a certain place or to be a certain someone, and then realizing that dream is gone or it's passed you by and then it's gone forever. I think that's a really emotional part of the movie. And the women who they meet are really, really fun and charming and interesting characters. I think the old lady with the bag of herbs is one of my favorites, and her relationship with Abby Lee, who I love Abby Lee a lot. I wish she would be in more things. The final sequence with the pole cats, I think they're called. I mean, you would not think that a 30-40 minute action sequence would be as methodical, as creative, and perfectly and consistently creative as this is. Because, for the most part, the movie is all action. It's almost all action. There aren't any other movies that I can think of that have that much action to where I'm always engaged. There's always some new kind of weird situation of danger that the characters are put in, twists, insane visual, final sequence where they go, into the canyon, and there's the polecats, Charlize Theron, Furiosa gets stabbed, Tom Hardy's bouncing from one car to the next. It's unbelievable to watch, and you really have to see it to believe it. I could say this part is amazing, this part is amazing, that part is amazing, and it still wouldn't do the movie justice. Even though I love that sequence in the first act or so where there's the breakout, the sandstorm sequence, and then the hand-to-hand fight with Furiosa and Max, like all that stuff is just each part of the movie is memorable. It's unique in its own setup. Like it's not, to me at least, it doesn't flow together. I can think, oh yeah, that part of the movie, this part of the movie, that part of the movie. And it just shows you that focus that George Miller has, that masterful direction and storytelling where he's able to make every segment its own thing. Again, sets it apart from all other action movies, I think, or at least a lot of them, especially in the modern day. But above all, even though I love every part of this movie, every action sequence at a 10 out of 10 level at least, I think the canyon sequence with the motorcycle tribal group is the best action sequence I think I could think of at this point in time. Like every time we get to that point in the movie, especially if I'm watching it with someone new, you have to see this sequence. The real locations, the real stunt work, the motorcycles going along the sides of the hills and the canyons, flying over the truck catching on fire, and the visual of the sand going in front of it, blowing out the fire, the monster trucks chasing Mad Max and Furiosa's character, motorcyclists sliding under the truck and grabbing on and holding on. And like, it's just unbelievable. It's so entertaining. It's so creative. It's so genius. And, if action movies aren't for you, I get that, but there's still, every time I watch it, I'm just blown away. Even though I know exactly what's going to happen. I know every part of this movie backwards and front, probably every line of dialogue. It's still just completely mind blowing. So that sequence I cannot say enough about. It's really where Furiosa and Max team up for the first time truly. One of the wives ends up getting killed, which is, very tragic. And then that sets off the rest of the movie in that chase, which leads into the crazy night sequence. The motorcycle canyon sequence, that is, I would love for someone to tell me what action sequence in another movie is better than that in terms of the overall production and execution of that sequence. It's amazing to me, and I will never ever tire of it. I don't think I'll ever change my opinion in terms of something topping it. Hey, if Furiosa tops it, great. But right as of now, that sequence is absolutely number one. Touching moment that I love, that shows that heart George Miller has in terms of injecting some emotion. It's not just some cold-hearted, emotionless movie. There is that heart there and that character there. It's where Tom Hardy has told Furiosa that he's going to make his own way, good luck. And then he's watching them drive off with the rest of the group in the morning. And then he sees the hallucination or mirage of his lost daughter. And she just says, "Come on, Pa, let's go." And then the next beat of the movie is him driving towards the group to catch up with them. And I think that's such a quick, perfectly executed moment where that's his motivation. He lost his daughter, is trying to survive, but he's out there also to help people if possible. And his daughter, not even just a dream hallucination of his daughter saying, "Come on, let's go help these people." Like, that's enough. Done. No questions asked. And I love that. And that's so pure that you don't really get very much, I think, in storytelling, especially in action movies. The final moments are great where Immortan Joe is killed. Nicholas Holt's character is killed, sadly, but that's an epic sequence where the guitar flies in front of the camera. That's awesome. Charlize Theron is being lifted up with the rest of the wives when they come back to the Citadel, and she's looking for Mad Max, and then he's wandering off, and they just give a nod to each other, and he goes off once again on his own way. So it just shows you that in spite of all the macho craziness of the movie, there's just very modest, understated, quiet hero wanderer. He says, "All right, hey, I did my job. I'll see you later." And that's their story. And I love that. There's no romance between them. It's purely just partnership. Let's get through this. And I love that. I could go on and on and on. I love every sequence in the movie. I think the performances are all great across the board. Visually, it's one of the most gorgeous movies, despite it being mostly daytime in the desert. It's one of the most beautiful movies that I've ever seen. The sandstorm sequence is insane to watch, especially with Nicholas Holt's character. That's where you first really get into that Valhalla war boy idea, which I love. It's so ridiculous where they're like the shining chrome stuff is hilarious. When you see that for the first time, you're like, what? Looking back on it, it's a crazy idea that you could see someone doing that at some point in the world, being completely not even having any kind of life of their own. It's just purely as a slave to this warlord. Nicholas Hoult, I think, is really good. I don't love him always, but I think he's pretty great in this. I'm hoping that they continue Mad Max's story with Tom Hardy at some point. I don't know if Charlize Theron is ever going to come back. I think even if she didn't, I think that's okay because she has her movie. This is her movie. It's not Mad Max's movie, her movie. The score by Junkie XL, amazing. And I think this is what really set him off on the charts. And he's done a lot of great work since then, including Mortal Engines, which we'll get to in just a minute. It's a movie you have to see. Even if it's not a movie for you, you just have to see it to believe it because it's one of a kind. It's going to be pretty hard to beat in terms of being knocked off my number one movie of all time list. I don't know movie in the future will do that. I hope it happens. But for now, it is still by far and has been since the moment I saw it, my favorite movie ever. And I hope everyone watches, and I hope a lot of people go to see Furiosa because this franchise needs to continue. It's so different, so refreshing, so crazy that it just needs to happen in the scope of modern Hollywood. Heavy 5 out of 5, 10 out of 5, 100 out of 5 for Fury Road. All right, so that is it for the Mad Max movies. Let's end off with Mortal Engines, which came out in 2018. It is directed by Christian Rivers, who worked on for the Middle-earth films. And it's written by Fran Walsh, Philippa Boyens, and Peter Jackson, who wrote the Hobbit films and the Lord of the Rings films. And Peter Jackson, he directed it. The movie stars Kira Helmar, Robert Sheehan, Hugo Weaving, Jihai, Ronan Rafferty, Layla George, Stephen Lang, and a few others. And the synopsis is, in a post-apocalyptic world where cities ride on wheels and consume each other to survive, two people meet in London and try to stop a conspiracy. This one made $83 million against a budget of around $150, so it's considered to be one of the biggest financial flops of all time. It lost almost $200 million, which is really, really too bad because I think this movie, it's not a masterpiece. It's not Fury Road. I thought it was so refreshing to see this in terms of even sense. Like, I think it's not perfect, but the Cities on Wheels is such a great idea, and it is almost a mix between Fury Road and Howl's Moving Castle. I love that idea. Visually, I think the movie is pretty great. Could do more with it, but I think for what it is, it looks pretty good, and the designs of the cities are awesome. The effects are very well done. I love the character of Hester Shaw, and I think I haven't seen that actress in many other things, but I think she's pretty great in this. I love the red design of her costume and the bandana and her scar. I think all that stuff is awesome and pretty iconic. I think the supporting cast, Hugo Weaving is always awesome. Stephen Lang, I didn't even realize until now that he was Shrike. That design of that character, the voice, it's a little over the top, but to me, I found it very compelling. I found it really resonated with me, and I really enjoyed that conflict and that journey. I like the idea of cities literally swallowing other cities and just consuming them, and then it gets into the idea of basically like capitalism in some ways, and world domination where it's big state versus small state, and if you're weak enough, you're done. You're going to become part of me. I like all that stuff. It's not some crazy deep film, but I like the overall concept and idea of it. I have read the original novel. Pretty good. A little bit different, but still close to the kind of story that's in this one. One strange thing that feels so, you can't really get worse branding than this, and it's the Minion artifact that they inject. Like, I love Despicable Me movies, but seeing that in the context of this movie is like, Jesus Christ. You did not need to. It's done by Universal. They just had to put that in there as a big joke. And I love Minions, but in the context of this movie, I was like, please don't tell me you did that actually, and made such a point of it. And so that moment, I'm like, ugh, I hate that. Overall, I do find the movie to be pretty entertaining, pretty emotionally compelling. I like the idea of those rebel underground moving cities and homes with the centipede-esque designed mobile home, I guess you can call it, prisons out in the middle of the ocean where they're keeping Shrike. I really like that idea and that visual, the green eyes of Shrike, the voice. I love all that stuff. It's a little much. Like I said, I enjoy it. I don't love Robert Sheehan. I think his character is a little lame, a little whiny, just not the kind of person especially thinking of it, a Mad Max or coming off of Mad Max or something. It's just, I think they could have done a lot better in terms of characters. I think Hester Shaw, again, she's awesome. I don't love him. I don't love the performance. It's just a bit of a doofy come along for the ride, learn to be brave by the end kind of thing. And I don't really enjoy that all that much. It's a little played out. Hugo Weaving, he can really do anything. He can be a villain. He can be a hero. And he's pretty great in this as seemingly the good guy, but turns out to be evil. A good score by Junkie XL. I think the third act of the movie is the weakest. It feels the most just generic action. It almost becomes like a Star Wars kind of sequence, which I don't mind. Action sequences towards the first half where it is cities literally chasing other cities. Hester Shaw looking through the sniper scope, searching the terrain. Like, I love all that stuff visually, conceptually. I think it's a really well done part of the movie. This is the kind of franchise I wish would get sequels. Even if it's not a masterpiece, it's not best of the decade. It's just different. It's weird. It's not as ambitious as something like Fury Road. Fun, really compelling, really entertaining. Got some good suspense and some good twists. I don't think there will be a sequel, but this is the kind of story that if you're in the right hands and the right story, you could do some really great, crazy things with this kind of series. And I don't think we're ever going to get that, which is too bad because there's so many other franchises that get huge box office successes that are so bland and repetitive that this one being by itself and just being the first movie is way better, I think, than a lot of others like it. Definitely check it out if you maybe haven't seen it or had heard about it and didn't do that well or wasn't that good. I'll give it a watch. I know some people aren't a big fan of it. I find it to be pretty solid, despite some of the flaws or more underwhelming parts of the movie. I still, for what it is, solid, worth a look, and I want to see something different for Hollywood action. That's a 4 out of 5. All right, that is about it for the show. As always, please make sure to subscribe to our Bandcamp page as well as to our regular feed, wherever you normally listen to podcasts. Thank you for downloading, donating, listening, all that good stuff. Follow us on social media at FilmBuds. Follow me and my wife, Elle, on Letterboxd. Let us know your thoughts on what you'd like to see more of, less of, reviews you'd like to have on franchises, directors, actors, whatever. We'd love to hear your thoughts and what you'd like to see covered. And as always, hope you enjoyed it even half as much as I did. And see you next time, y'all.